Morning. How's everybody doing? Nice. It's good to be back here. I was here a year ago, so if you've been around, you might recognize me. I didn't have this beard, so maybe you won't. And hope if my wife has anything to say about it, next time I'm here, I won't have it, and you won't recognize me again. So I'm going to go a little bit off script here. I just want to share a little bit of my heart with you and tell you kind of what this whole thing did to me. When I was here last, I kind of shared with you this story about some of my friends and I who are pastors and this encounter we had with our mayor who invited us as a secular mayor to a bunch of pastors to go and do the thing that Jesus said mattered most if we really cared about our city. And that whole moment just messed up my life. And it messed it up in a really good way. And what happened to me is that I got into ministry, full-time vocational ministry. I think we're all in ministry. Can we agree on that? But I think I got into full-time vocational ministry because I had this passion and this desire to be around people who didn't know God and to see them take steps towards Him. And then I woke up one day about 8 years into being a full-time pastor, and it dawned on me that most of my friends were believers. And I had taken this passion, this desire that I had to meet people and to see them come to know God, and then somehow I ended up in this place where I was spending the vast, vast majority of my time hanging out with a bunch of Christians. And I couldn't articulate it, but there was something going on inside of me that I was missing. I knew something was out of whack. And what this neighboring thing did, when my mayor said, hey, the smartest thing you could do in our city is go and use all those people who are sitting in your churches every week and invite them to be like good, literal neighbors, like the best neighbors on their block. Could you use all those Christians and start a neighboring movement in our city? What it did to me personally was it gave me an excuse to begin to orient my life in a way in which I could spend time with the people who God had put right around me. And when I started to build relationships with people based on proximity, when you start to build relationships based on proximity, you are guaranteeing yourself that you're going to be hanging out with people that think about the world totally differently than you do, and that are a lot different than you, and that have different interests than you do. And so God just used this thing in my life to reawaken me and to reconnect me with my original calling. And so I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid now. That happened about 6 years ago for me, and I was a really bad neighbor when my mayor laid it on the table for us. I wasn't intentional at all about what was happening on my block because I was too busy going and trying to build outreach programs so that maybe somehow, some way, a non-believer might come to our church and meet Jesus. So I didn't actually have time to walk outside my front door and to live at a pace in which I could engage with the people that were right around me that didn't know Jesus. I was too busy trying to figure out how to do some weird thing at a church so they'd come and do that. And so I know now, after 6 years, that there's a reason when Jesus said, if you only do one thing, love God with everything you have and love your neighbors yourself. The reason is because it's really simple, and it's really sacred, and it's really potent if we would actually just do it. And so for me personally, I built up all these different things. I built a framework in which I could go do all this metaphoric neighboring in my life because I was doing a lot of good things, and I'm sitting on the board of 3 different nonprofits, and I'm working for a church. Of course I'm loving my neighbors, right? So I built this whole weird framework up in my mind and in my life that somehow gave me a loophole out of actually engaging with the people who live right outside my front door, who are sleeping 30, 40, 50 feet away from me. And I think when we begin to unravel that and to just go back to the basics, God does some incredible things. He doesn't just do it to the people who live around it. He also does it to us. I got into this thing thinking it's going to be the greatest evangelism initiative, weird campaign thing that I've ever been a part of. And what I've come to learn on the back end of this is people do come to know Jesus all over the place, but it's actually the greatest discipleship tool. when we begin to give ourselves to relationships with the people who live right around us, God doesn't just change our neighborhoods, he actually begins to change us. When we give ourselves to hang out with the socially awkward neighbor who we might not ever choose to spend time with unless we actually thought God meant to love our neighbors, like it begins to surface weird stuff in our life. Selfishness, a tie to some of our possessions and our things, confronts us about our time. It just does some amazing things. So my wife and I and our kids have just learned that the discipline of literal neighboring is actually one of the best spiritual formation tools that we can give ourselves to change ourselves as well. So I'm excited to be back here. I'm excited that this is a place that, at the earliest stage, you guys are injecting this into the DNA of this church. And I will tell you, I know this, I've seen this other places. If you give yourself to this, it will change this church. It'll change you, it'll change this church. It will breathe vibrancy and life into this place in a very, very significant way. And so I hope over these 3 weeks that you take this seriously. I hope that it's something, it's not one of those things you just come and go, oh, good talk. And then you walk out the door and you're just on your way. Like, I hope it's something that we begin to just take small steps towards actually living this out. And so last time I was here, we did this little I did a little test with you. So for some of you, this might be a test. For some of these, this could be a quiz if you took it before. But anybody remember this? Remember the tic-tac-toe board? This little thing right here, this little refrigerator magnet that we're going to give you on the way out, this is like 100 times better than the book. That's actually, it's 1,000 times. Like, this was the secret. This was the key to everything that happened in my community with this group of churches. Is we just asked people to start to learn and retain and to use the names of the people who live right around them. That was it. And so this little thing, we asked people to put it on their fridge, and we said, would you take this home? Would you make a commitment to just start to write down the names of the people who live around you? And then would you do something really radical? Would you actually pray and say, God, what's that next small step that you want me to take? And so I want to encourage you to keep doing this. And I was really encouraged today. A few people grabbed me in the lobby and said, hey, I'm actually doing that thing you talked about. Okay? And that's amazing. For me, as a person who speaks, I've been a pastor for a long time, it's always amazing to me when people actually do something after what we say. Maybe that shouldn't surprise me, but I get really encouraged about that. So I want to encourage you. So right now, since I was here last, so this whole thing is you walk outside your front door, right? And just imagine the 8 closest apartment units, condos, households, whatever it is to you. I know your neighborhood doesn't look like a tic-tac-toe board, but just imagine those 8 households that are right there. How many of you, since the time I was here last, since a year ago, how many of you have been intentional and you actually know somebody's name who you didn't know a year ago? Just raise your hand right now. 2, 3. That's fantastic. Okay, how many of you actually written it down? You've been intentional about writing it down? Way to go. Yeah, that's a big key. So this little thing started to mess me up because all of a sudden their names were, I only knew 2 when I first did this, but all of a sudden I had it filled in and their names started to get inside of my thoughts and my prayers. And there's all kinds of weird stuff on my fridge that's just total white noise. My kids' papers and grades and all kinds of stuff like that. So, but I don't look at it. Maybe you're a better parent than I am. I don't look at that. I just go to my fridge every day and just it's just there. It's just white noise. But for some reason, God got into my head on this thing, and I had all these things filled in. And I started to look at them, and they became real people with real faces and real names. And they weren't just that person who drives a blue car who I call bro. It was an actual person, right? And then you kind of learn their name, and you start to use their name when you see them, and then you just start to take the next small step. And that's it. That's what happened in my community. And the ripple effect, I think right now, we've given out over 200,000 of these magnets now to people who have said, I'm making a commitment to learn and retain and to use those names. And so if you would enter into this, you're part of something that's much bigger, and you're part of something that's really potent and that really works. And so I hope this becomes a regular part. I hope you're constantly taking this quiz, and Keith, you should be up here on announcement time going, hey, how's it going? Okay, we're going to do a quiz today. How many of you have learned, since we did the neighboring series, how many of you have actually learned somebody's name? How many of you have actually, that couple that you keep saying that you're going to invite over, that you've been saying for like 3 years, hey, we should really have them over? What if you actually had them over? Right? Like, so it's all about just taking that next small step. And so today, I just want to share a text with you, a story, and break it down, and then we'll kind of like look at it through the neighboring lens. It's a story that's, for me, been profound in how I've understood and the interactions with many of my neighbors. When the name part, that gets you, that's like a big deal. So like somebody is a stranger, you know their name and you use their name when you see them, and now they're an acquaintance. Okay, that's a really big step. And so that's what that little block map thing did for us, is it helped people go from strangers to acquaintances. And today we're going to talk about what does it look like to go from acquaintance to a friend? What's it look like to develop friendships with people? And as I started to think about this in my neighborhood, I came to the realization that my wife and I didn't need to start throwing block parties. My wife and I didn't need to start gathering people in our neighborhood to develop friendships. All we had to do was show up to the block parties that were already going on. There were people on my little loop of 42 homes. They were already gathering and they were already hanging out. And yet, I was too busy doing other stuff to actually be a part of that. And I had some assumptions and some preconceived notions that were hindering me from engaging with them. And one of those is something I actually think is really healthy. I grew up in the church, and so when I was young, my youth pastor, I had this amazing, godly man who would like pour into me. And one of the things that he told me is he said, Dave, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And at that season of my life, in my personal formation, it was one of the most important things that somebody's ever told me. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. Well, now fast forward about into my early 30s, mid-30s, I'm sitting around in my neighborhood and I start to realize that I haven't been engaging with these people in my neighborhood, because when my neighbors get together, I don't know about what your neighbors are, when my neighbors get together, they like throw real parties, okay? They're not doing church potlucks. And so there's like real parties, okay? And there's like a ton, they don't just like hang out and have a beer, they have like 18 beers. And I just had this in the back of my head that like something from like my early formation about my friends was hindering me from engaging with them. And it dawned on me, like, I'm not in my early adolescent of my spiritual formation anymore. I'm like really secure in who I am and rooted in what I believe. And yet I've got some mental block going on that was hindering me from being in the game. And as I started to read through Scripture, I started to see this pattern that Jesus had in his life. Has anybody ever noticed that Jesus, on a routine basis, hangs out with people that make the religious people feel nervous? Like, the religious people are always looking at Jesus going, man, you're hanging out with like some really sketchy people. Remember the What Would Jesus Do bracelets? You guys remember those? Right? And so the what here, if you don't remember them, you're lucky. It's a weird time for Christian subculture. But so there's these bracelets, and then we would do this spiel about, and I actually believe this, real spiritual maturity is that we become more and more like Jesus. We live out the practices of Jesus. That is what true spiritual maturity looks like. And so the heart behind the What Would Jesus Do bracelets was actually really dialed in. But there was always kind of this spiel, like, what would Jesus do in this moment? Jesus would forgive, because Jesus is really forgiving. Here's some places in the text. Jesus prays a lot, and so we need to also be, Jesus withdraws and spends time in solitude, and so that's what Jesus would do. You know what never made that list? Jesus hangs out with people that make all the religious people nervous. Jesus hangs out with people that are that sketchy all the time. That never got into the What Would Jesus Do bracelet list, but I actually think it's something that he does over and over. Why don't we want to copy that? Okay? And there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to copy, but think about that. We don't want to copy that. That's one, that was just Jesus. That was just for Jesus. He was like supernatural. He was supposed to be a part of like the best parties. We're not actually supposed to do that. Right? How weird is that? How strange is that? And I want to tell you something. Great things happen when the people of God are part of the best parties in town. Great things happen when we go and engage. Now, this isn't a license to kill. One, if you have a struggle, if you have an addiction, I'm not saying go put yourself in a place where you're going to be having obstacles in your way to your own personal health. I'm also not saying that just because you go to those parties and those people that are sitting there are doing certain things that you have to do those things. In fact, I would argue that there is something really special happens when some of your neighbors look at you and go, hey, I just noticed this about you. I noticed you actually, like, you never drink more than 1 or 2 beers, or you don't drink at all, whatever. I don't know how, I'm probably stepping on all the things here, but so you can clean up my mess later. I don't really care. Okay? Now, I just want to dive in. I want to look at a story in Luke 7. I want to read this story to you, and then I want to talk to you about some of the lessons that we can learn about how Jesus interacted in some of these moments, and to think about it in the life of our own neighborhoods. So if you have a Bible, you can go to Luke 7. It's an incredible story. There's a number of things that we can learn from it, and we're just going to barely scratch the surface. In fact, I've taught this text a number of times, and I used to always teach it from this one specific angle that you'll see around grace that comes out of it. We're going to look at it from a little bit different angle today. So I'm going to pick it up in verse 37 and 38. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Stop there for a second. So banquets in this day are very different than they are today. They were often public affairs that were held in courtyards right outside somebody's home. And so anybody walking by could simply stop and watch and could even wander into a party without being noticed for a bit. We're told about a woman that is a sinner. Okay, now when you read that word in the Bible, I'm just going to do like a little kind of exegeting little tip for you here. When you read this woman was a sinner, that's code for this woman was a prostitute, and it was well known. At some point before this encounter, maybe even earlier that day, she had heard Jesus teaching. She had seen him do a miracle. And something about him, about what he said, how he acted, struck something very deep in her heart. And she was overwhelmed by love for this man. And then she sees him that night sitting in the banquet. And she has this thought, I could go over there. I could kiss his feet. To wash somebody's feet was an act of respect, but to kiss them, it's an act of utter abandonment. So imagine what this scene must have looked like. This woman walks into this party, through this courtyard, to the table where Jesus and Simon, this religious leader, this pastor, are sitting. And with everybody watching, she kneels down at Jesus' feet to kiss them. Jesus' feet, by the way, that were unwashed by the host, Simon, are now drenched with this woman's tears. And then she lets down her hair and she begins to dry off his feet. We read on, she has this jar, this alabaster jar of ointment, one that she probably wore around her neck. And because of her profession, this flask is probably the most expensive thing that she owns. And she just empties the whole thing out. She can't anoint his head because in her mind she's a sinful woman. This is a holy man. She thinks, I'm just going to pour it all over his feet. And she kisses his feet over and over again as a result of his sheer goodness. She just pours out love and gratitude in this radical proclamation in front of these people that she doesn't know. And Simon, the religious leader, he's there watching. But we're told he doesn't see it. In verse 39, we read this. When the Pharisee who invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Simon watches all of this stuff and he just thinks to himself, Jesus isn't the real deal after all. If Jesus was the real deal, he would know about this woman. Even I can see about it. And he would not allow something so unclean to touch him and to act like this, especially in public. And then Jesus does something unbelievable. He responds to what Simon is thinking. I'd read this text a number of times, and I never really caught this. Like, think about how weird this would be. What would it be like to have Jesus sit there and just look at you and dial you in and respond to what you're thinking? Jesus looks at Simon and he tells him a story. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them, a denarii is about a day's wage, neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? So today the parable probably goes like this. There's a guy who has racked up like a lot of cell phone bills, and he just puts them all on his credit card for years, right? And he owes $4,000 on his credit card bill. There's this other person who has had some bad luck, has made some bad decisions, and has maxed out multiple credit cards, has defaulted on his car loan, is now getting ready to get his house evicted, and in total owes about $250,000 to the bank and to other debtors. And then the president of the bank consolidates all of that, and he reaches out to both people and he says, hey, I just want you to know that I'm giving you a clean slate. Which of those two people is going to be more in love? It's going to have which one of those two people is going to have their world turned upside down more? Right? Simon's listening to this, and Jesus asks him the question, and he knows it's weird. He knows he's trapped. And Simon's response is classic. He says, I suppose the one that had the bigger debt canceled. He doesn't even want to say it. I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You judge right, Simon. You get a gold star. That's the right answer. Now, up to this point in the conversation, everything has been right between Jesus and Simon. But then we see that Jesus turns towards the woman, and looking at her, he says to Simon this crucial phrase. He says, Simon, do you see this woman? So verse 44, it says, then he turned toward the woman. He said to Simon, Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as great love has shown, but whoever has forgiven little loves little. Jesus then said to her, your sins are forgiven. Simon, do you see this woman? I think this question is very relevant to all of us. Every day we are around people that we don't really see. Every day we fall into this same trap that this religious leader fell into. We make assumptions, we put people in certain categories, and it hinders us from actually seeing them. Do you see this woman? Are we really taking time to see the people that are right around us? My journey into neighboring was all about learning to see people that were all around me. I was really busy doing a lot of neighboring, and I would come home after long days and then dropping off kids to multiple sporting events and grabbing fast food on the way home. And my garage door would go up, and I would go in, and my garage door would go down, and I'd go inside and kind of detox from everything that had happened that day, and then I'd wake up, and I would do it over and over and over again. And I wasn't like just hanging out, binge watching Netflix. I was doing like some pretty good things. I was doing like a lot of like what I call serving Jesus. I love the Mary Martha story. Like, have you ever like wrapped your head around how incredible it is that Martha gets reprimanded for serving Jesus? She misses the main thing because she's serving Jesus, while Mary is sitting there being present at his feet. That's how I lived for a lot of my life. And when I started to slow down and I started to take some small steps to engage the people who lived right around me, what I began to learn is that there were people all around me who were dying for a real relationship. Now, some of my neighbors don't want to be my friends. Some of my neighbors are really busy. And they live like I lived for most of my life, just trying to get that garage door up, get it down, detox, repeat. But some of my neighbors are dying for a relationship. All they have are these surface things that they have at work, and then these like dysfunctional things that we all have in our family systems. And they just don't have anyone they actually talk to at any kind of level of depth. I think one of the most important things that we can do in order to develop friendships is to stop and to see what's already going on around us. To be the kinds of people who just lean in and go like just a tiny bit below the surface level. The other day, I had looked at my neighbor and I asked him, hey, like, what are you learning right now about parenting? There was like some nightmare situation that we were kind of processing, and then I just said, what are you learning about parenting? And we talked for like 20 minutes. And he got done, and he looked at me and he goes, hey, Dave, I don't have conversations like this with anyone else in my life. And it just dawned on me how ripe the harvest is all around me. How few real relationships most people have. And how little it takes to actually just lean in and to engage and to meet somebody in a place of significance. And there's a number of reasons that we don't do this. A lot of times it's because we are busy. A lot of times we're like Simon. We've got people put in certain boxes. We've got these assumptions made. A lot of times it's because of fear. I think that's one of the things that stops many of us. Maybe what's going on here with Simon is really driven by fear. Maybe there's something going on in him that if he just leaned in a little bit with somebody like this woman, what could happen next? What would other people think? And so I think good things happen when we are willing to be the type of people who cross over some of those boundaries. One of the big lessons that I see in this story is that there's an actual art to receiving. Like Jesus sits there, he allows this woman to come and to serve him, to express this radical love towards him. When I first started thinking about my neighborhood, my temptation was, because of who I am, is I've been put on this little like super Christian neighbor cape, and I wonder who like the widow, where are the widows on my block? Oh, I wonder if they have anything wrong with their house. Who are the people that really are in need? I should go become friends with them so I can do nice stuff for them. You ever have anybody in your life, you have any friends that have been really helpful to you? Have really poured into you? Have meant a lot to you and made a difference in your life? And that when you ask them, hey, how are you doing? Hey, is there anything I could ever do? It's always the same. I'm good. No, I'm good. Oh, I'm good. I'm just so glad I could help you. I'm good. Okay, if you have relationships like that, you know this. Over time, there is a ceiling to the friendship and to the level of intimacy that you can have with that person. Like the developing friendship part gets halted when it's always just a one-way street. It doesn't mean those relationships are bad. It does mean that they're not reciprocal. Real relationships are two-way streets. Real relationships are reciprocal. And oftentimes, I think, as believers, when we go out and think about what does it look like to serve and to engage other people, it's very easy for us to fall into this trap of being that person, that guy, that gal, who is like, no, I'm good. I'm just glad I can help you. I think one of the most powerful things we can do as we develop relationships and friendships with people is actually become aware of areas in our life that other people could meet our needs. Stop being the weird person that has it all together. Okay? If you don't need to go, like I used to go and drive to the auto parts store just to get my headlight fixed, and I would go in there and say, hey, this is the kind of car I have, and like, can you get that for me? And then they would hand it to me. And then I would go stand in the parking lot And then I would like look at my headlight, then I walk back in and I go, hey, do you know like how to put this in? And so then it's like a great way. You don't have to like pay Grease Monkey or whatever to like do your lights like this. You save like $10 whole by having this mildly awkward moment with the person that works in there. That's what I used to do. The whole time there was a guy who lived across the street from me and he worked on his car like 12 hours a day. And I remember getting in my car one day to go and to like try to figure out the headlight thing, and I'm thinking to myself, this is stupid. What am I afraid of? What am I doing? I literally stopped and I went and said, hey, like, could we just go to the auto parts store? One, I don't even know what type of light bulb to get, and number two, I don't even know how to put it in. And he said, yeah. And what happened in that little moment, that 20 minutes, furthered our relationship more than any other thing that we had ever done prior. And all it meant was that I had to like learn the art of receiving. I just had to learn how to be somebody who was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't have this. Could I borrow it? You seem like you have a certain level of proficiency, a passion in this area of your life. Could you help me? My lawn looks like, yours is like 10 times better than mine. What are you doing over there? Like, what is that? Like, is it magic? Or can you like teach me what you're up to so that I don't get a letter from the HOA? These are really attainable, simple things that we can do in order to further relationships with the people who live around us. And Jesus sets a precedent for it. Over and over again, we see these times. Of course, he's out there serving, impacting people, using his gifts for others. And there's also times where he allows other people, Jesus allows other people to serve him. Like, could we do that as well? And could that be the key for us to being the kind of people that God wants us to be in our neighborhoods? Every day, we make choices of whether or not we're going to go just a little bit deeper, that we're going to live at a pace in which we're actually interruptible, that we're going to engage with the people who live right around us. Every day we have encounters with others that could go one way or the other. That we could continue to reinforce an assumption, or we could slow down and to say, wait, I'm just going to take some time. I'm just going to ask one question. I'm just going to be a little bit more accessible. Maybe that thing that I was thinking isn't true. Maybe, I think one of the hardest things for us is we live in this like 24-hour news cycle, and we have so much access to stories that are all over the world. And there's like TV shows about like people, like this weird woman, Nancy Grace, her whole TV show is like, I think she just scours the internet for a day, finds the worst possible story that's going to make you sick to your stomach, and then talks about it for an hour. And then if people keep calling in, then they'll talk about that same story for multiple days, and then once that runs out, then they'll just do that again. Think about what that does to our psyche. Think about what it does when the person who moves in next to us is like some single, like 40-year-old, and he's like an introvert, and like the things that start going through your head, right? I mean, maybe you're better people than I am. That's what happens to me. And I think it's worth us slowing. Now, here's the hard part. There's some really sick, broken, depraved people in our world. I'm not saying that we just throw out all discernment, but I am saying, like, is it worth it for us to slow down enough and to begin to question, have I made some assumptions? Have I put some people in some categories and some boxes that I haven't, that's not fair? That just because I want to live at a pace, just because I want to get things done, it's just easier for me to box them up and to think of that about them than to actually engage them in any meaningful way. I just want to encourage you guys as a church. Are you willing to be the types of people that just live at depth with others? I'm not saying you have to go and be best friends with every one of your neighbors. I am saying, what would it look like if the people of 3D Church were the kinds of people that just went a little bit below the surface with the people that God's put around them, with the people who they work beside, with the parents on your kids' soccer team? What would it look like if this church was the kind of people that you just knew how to ask a question? Like, hey, what are you learning about parenting? And I think when, I'll just close it, like our motives really matter, especially in neighboring. The sad reality is this, like in our culture, when a Christian does something nice for a non-Christian, a lot of times the non-Christian braces himself for like what weird thing is going to happen to him, right? And I think this is a reason why a lot of us don't do anything, is we know this and we're paralyzed by it. And we get stuck. And this little block map, this little grid, what it did for a lot of my friends and for myself is that it helped us to get unstuck, helped us to take small, normal steps. Our motives really do matter. If you're going into this and the only reason is to see somebody like say a prayer, come to know Jesus, your neighbors will sniff that out. And it'll get weird, and it won't be very effective. If you go into this thinking, even if my neighbor never takes a step towards God, I still feel like Jesus has called me to engage with this person and to try to build a relationship with this person. If you go into it with that understanding, the crazy thing is people start coming to know Jesus all over the place. It's like a very counterintuitive thought. Like you can't go in with these weird ulterior motives. My ultimate motive is I want everybody I know to know Jesus Christ. I want them to run smack dab into him and get their lives turned upside down. That's my ultimate motive. But ulterior motives happen when we do these like weird bait and switch things. And when we do that with the people that are around us, I think that they know it. They can sniff it out. They've probably had some other weird experiences with people like us, unfortunately. And it just minimizes the potency of actually just taking the second half of the Great Commandment literally and seriously. So as you go out into your neighborhoods, as you begin to take out what we're talking about here over these 3 weeks seriously, I want to just encourage you to do something. Don't be weird. Like, go and just actually go like you would any other friend, any other relationship you have in your life. Go just begin to get to know people, to allow things to happen organically, and just to keep taking the next small step. Share the things you love. Talk about cars and golf and Jesus. And I think good things will happen. Let's pray. God, I pray this would be a group of people that continue to build friendships, to develop significant relationships with the people that you've placed all around them. God, I thank you for this church. We need more churches like this all over our city. This is the key to what it means to see the kingdom become tangible, become the Denver metro area, become the kind of place that you want it to be. So I thank you for what you're doing here, Lord. I pray that you just fan a flame, a fresh energy and a passion across every single person in this room. Thanks, God, for making it really simple and really clear and really powerful. In your name, amen.